We're delighted to have Charlie Walker in the studio with us this morning, and anybody who's a World War II fan or a plane fan, I'm sure will know of Charlie. And I was up till 1 o'clock last night watching the Guy Martin documentary.
Very good, very good.
So I'm so excited to have you in the studio and to ask you lots of questions. But we're going to start off. Your first track this morning was Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, and we'll explain all why you chose this track after the track. Lovely. And that was Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, and chosen by our lovely guest this morning, Charlie Walker, who's in the studio to tell us about such an exciting project. Any war fans or plane fans will be just so intrigued to hear about Night Fright. So what... Who? She? Is it a she?
Yeah, I guess it is a she. I think people tend to refer to aeroplanes or cars as she generally, don't they? So let's go with she. So yeah, so she or the C-47 Dakota DC-3 that was christened Night Fright by the pilots during the war is a C-47 aircraft that was based at RAF or USAAF memory, however you want to refer to it, during the Second World War. And basically we found her in a scrapyard in the USA, and we brought her back to the UK with the aim of getting her restored and getting her flying from memory again.
Blimey, so just to put a context, you are part of the Walker family who currently own Membry and run a business there, and you happen to be a pilot, so it's all an incredible jigsaw puzzle that's kind of culminating in this incredibly ambitious project.
Were you looking for the Dakota, or did you just happen to come across it while you were going out to get a pastrami sandwich?
Well, no, we were looking for it. So yeah, if I go back right to the start really and sort of put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, as you say. So our family have sort of lived at Membry and in the area for over 20 years, since the early 90s really, and we established part of our business, Walker Logistics Limited, at Membry Airfield in 1999. And obviously there's so much history around Membry Airfield and the local area in general really. So we sort of started to look into this in a little bit of detail, and with my interest in aviation, being a commercial pilot. And we sort of thought, well, let's try and give something back to the local area. Let's see if we can find one of these airplanes that flew from Membry and see if we can get something going. Initially, we thought, let's just get a gate guardian, a static aircraft. Let's sort of stick it on a big stick, if you like, outside the airfield, so people knew.
Like at Heathrow, you get the static planes.
Like a full-size one.
A full-size one. Like they have at most of the RAF bases. They call them gate guardians, so they have something significant to that airfield, sort of stationed back there. But we thought, no, we can do better than that. Let's go a little bit further than that, and it's gone a lot further than that, to be fair. So how we track Night Fright down is a couple of my friends, Roger Day, who's a local historian, which I'm sure some of your listeners will be familiar with his work, Memory at War,
He's written a lot of books.
A lot of local books, yeah, and it's great stuff. And another friend of mine called Tom Woodhouse, who is a mechanic on these sort of old school warbirds, and he's also what I'd call probably an aviation sort of archaeologist. So believe it or not, he actually drew up a spreadsheet of every single C-47 that flew from Membry during the Second World War. Bearing in mind there's 50 odd of those. Blimey. He traced their exact serial numbers, their locations, what they'd done after the war, and then we sort of progressively went through that list, trying to select an aircraft that would be suitable, and we wound up finding Night Fright in a scrapyard in Arkansas.
And what kind of condition was it in? Did it have all its wings and...
Well,
What was she?
Sorry.
Let's go with she. But the ironic thing is, she was pretty much airworthy. I mean, she hadn't turned an engine for probably 18 months, 2 years, but to the untrained eye, it looked like an aircraft. But it's kind of difficult to explain this to people, really, but post-war, all of these C-47 aircraft were turned into DC-3. DC-3 is the civilian equivalent of a C-47. So they stripped out all of the military equipment, all of the paratrooper benches, all of the radio gear, and just turn it into an airliner with passenger seats in it, or no passenger seats, and a winch and a cargo floor, and they hauled cargo with it. So
it was used by commercial airlines?
Yeah, absolutely.
40s and 50s?
Yeah, huge. It's got over 60,000 hours on the airframe. Obviously, a lot of that's during the war, but a lot of that's post-war as well. I mean, we've traced every step of its history, be it wartime or post-war, but what we're trying to do is twofold really. We've obviously got to go right through that aeroplane in terms of a ground up restoration, make sure it's safe and it's airworthy, replace all of the hardware, the screws, the nuts and bolts, the pipes, everything, but we're also taking it back from an airliner back to its World War II specifications. So a significant part of the project is researching exactly what it would have had installed during the war, finding it and installing it.
So that's a fun project for somebody who's really into that.
It's a fun project, but it's a big project. It's expensive as well. There's a cost and a time element to it for sure. But I mean, we're lucky. We've got a fantastic team of guys working with us, and if we didn't have those guys on our side, this wouldn't happen to the level it's happening to at the moment. So it's at Coventry at the moment. There's a team called Heritage Air Services working on it. So the history of Coventry Airfield is that for a long time they were the recognised sort of DC-3 people in the UK. There was an airline there called Air Atlantique, and for a long time they operated DC-3s, probably, I don't know, somewhere in the region of 15 or 16 DC-3s carrying passengers and cargo, until such a time that it became sort of uneconomic for various reasons to use these old piston engine aeroplanes for commercial air transport, and they moved on to more modern aircraft. And anyway, a long story short, a lot of that sort of know-how, parts inventory and just general sort of equipment remains at Coventry. So in terms of a restoration, they're the best guys to take it to, and the only place to take it to.
So how did you get it from America here?
Well, therein lies another story, really. So initially, we found the aircraft in the scrapyard in Arkansas. We did a quick survey on it, and within 2 weeks, we probably had that aircraft flying, albeit it wasn't in a very good state. But we actually flew it 3 hours to Florida and landed in a place called Punta Gorda. And there's sort of a bunch of DC-3 operators in Punta Gorda, and initially we thought these guys were going to complete the whole job for us. For various reasons, it turned out that that probably wasn't the best plan. So we probably got, what did we get? Probably 4 or 5 years into those guys doing the project, and we sort of realised that, one, they probably weren't up to the job, and two, sort of commuting between Florida 4 or 5 times a year probably wasn't the most economic way of running the project.
4 or 5 years into the project.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not talking about something that you drop it off on Thursday and you pick it up again on Monday.
Oh, crikey, no. This goes back to the beginning of 2012. It's a huge undertaking. I mean, a DC-3 from wingtip to wingtip is 100 feet wide. It's a big thing, and you got to take it apart, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. But to cut a long story short, once we realised these guys weren't really able to complete the job, we sent a team of engineers out to Florida, and they were on the ground for probably 6 or 7 weeks completely disassembling this aircraft and essentially packing it into 40-foot sea containers and then sailing it across to Southampton and then trucking it by road up to Coventry, where we currently are with the project.
Blimey, so she couldn't have flown over the Atlantic, you couldn't have flown her?
Well, we would have done. That was the initial plan. I mean, you probably just noticed as part of the D-Day celebrations for the 75 years, there's a number of aircraft that have just made that very crossing. And if the aircraft had been restored in Florida or anywhere else in the US, I would have done exactly that. I would have flown it across. Great adventure. It's probably a week's worth of flying and 5 or 6 stops.
Across the Atlantic?
Where would you stop?
So you'd have to go up to somewhere like Goose Bay in Canada, and then they'd probably go to somewhere like Nasasarack or Greenland, and then across to the top of Scotland in Prestwick, and then obviously down to southern England. So it's 4 or 5 stops.
So how many miles can it fly without refuelling them?
Well, it depends what fuel tanks you've got installed. If you've got what we call long-range ferry tanks in it, but it'll do 3 or 4 hours generally speaking. But it's not going to go across the pond in one hit like an airliner. We have to do what we call the blue spruce route, which is essentially
around the Great Circle,
an upside down U to sort of to go up to come down, if you will, really. So great fun though, and we'll do it one day. We'll take Night Fright back across without a doubt. So,
blimey! So we've got her as far as Coventry then, and this is now about 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, 2.5, 3 years ago, and when we were working on the project in the US, I'd say we were more sort of playing at it, if that makes sense. I mean, without us able to be there managing every detail, you're sort of leaving them to their own devices, really. And so it kind of trickled along. And as I say, we then realised that, one, they weren't up to it, and two, we needed to take control of it, really. And ever since it landed at Coventry 2.5 years ago, we've been hard at it. And when I say hard at it, I mean 12 guys working on it 6 days a week trying to get this thing flying. So it's busy. It's busy.
And are these, I mean, these are dedicated people. It sounds like the volunteers at Croft and Beam Engines, just somebody so passionate about the machinery that they'll do it for
Yeah, there's a bit of that. You know, most of them are full-time, so they work for Heritage Air Services as their employees. There are a few guys that volunteer, specialists that come in and out and do sort of little chunks, if you will. But you know, essentially they are a full-time team, and it's been a massive project.
Yeah, I don't want to ask what it's cost you so far, but
I missed the bit at the beginning, or probably a bit I wanted to ask, and because I was making tea. So where was the plane originally? Where did you find it?
We found it in a scrapyard in Arkansas, in the US.
A scrapyard?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said to the guys, ironically, it probably was pretty much an airworthy airplane. Okay, it hadn't turned engines for probably a couple of years, 18 months, something like that. But within a week, we flew it out. But it was ready for the chop. That's what it was doing there. It was sort of next in the queue kind of thing. So.
Blimey, so it was going to get pulped? Or
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
they would have, you know, they would have stripped the engines off and sold those off, and you know, any bits they could have sort of sold off, they would have done. The rest of it would have just been scrapped.
So how many of these planes are still in existence that have escaped the knackers yards?
Oh, good question. Worldwide, I'd say there's probably between 250 and 300 of these flying. They're mainly utilised probably in Southern America and Africa, where they still regularly use what we call sort of old equipment for carrying passengers and cargo. But in genuine World War II C-47 specification in the UK and Europe, there'll be 3 in the UK. If you went sort of further afield and into Europe, a dozen maximum, not all in World War II spec, but DC-3s in airline spec. But you know, you say that there's quite a few of them. But there's also a couple of companies in the United States, probably the most well-known, called Basler Turboprops, and what they do is they modernise these aircraft. So they put turbine engines on them. So they remove the piston engine, sort of modernise the airframe and put turbine engines on. They're still used in major air forces across the world. I mean, the United States Air Force flew one in Afghanistan for many years. So it's a very capable aircraft, and I guess testament to the design from the 1930s that even though it's been modernised, it's still flying today. Really.
Were they American originally?
Yeah, they're built in America. Yeah.
So how frustrating, or I could think of another word for the team in Florida, that these Brits came over and told them they just weren't up to it.
Yeah, I guess there's a little bit to that. Yeah, to be
Yes,
fair,
I should imagine you were told very clearly what they thought of you.
well, actually, do you know what? It was an amicable conversation. I think, to be honest, they probably realised they were in too deep as well. So I think, in a certain sense, they were probably relieved. We took it as much as anything. They're great guys. I mean, Frank Moss, who's the lead guy there, he's a legendary DC-3 pilot. He flew, for example, the silver DC-3 in the James Bond film Quantum of Solace, if you ever saw that sequence, and his son Glenn. So there's a small team of 2 of them, so it was just too big a project for them. It's not that they're not capable, but you know, a project of this size, we've had 12 guys working on it for 3 years, and we've still got 6 months of work left. So that gives you an idea of how long it would have taken if there's 2 people working on it.
And this was a plane that was only 18 months since the engine had turned, and which you managed to fly for a short distance after only a week or so. So imagine how much work could be needed on one of the planes that was in less good condition. I mean, it's something the mind boggles, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, for us, it's all about night fright and memory and the history, really. We could have found a DC-3 anywhere and pulled it out of the hedge, and it was in better condition than night fright.
But this was one that had been at memory.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole premise. This aircraft flew all of the major airborne missions throughout the war, most of those obviously being from memory. So it was very much about memory, and once we'd identified the aircraft, it was all about night fright. I mean, when we surveyed the aircraft, the guys turned around to us and they said, "You'd be better off scrapping this and finding another one." No, we're not going to do that. It's not about a DC-3.
No.
It's about the history. It's about the history, really.
Are there any crew members still alive?
There aren't. I did have the opportunity to speak to both of the pilots before they sadly passed away 3 or 4 years ago. But I'm in regular communication with their family, and actually their family came over this week. I had one of the families visiting the aircraft up at Coventry. That was a pretty emotional day for them, actually, to be honest.
But it was.
I speak to them probably every month via Skype.
Are they in America?
They're American, right. Yeah. They're in America, various parts of the United States.
Was the Membury airfield one that was commissioned at the start of the war? Had it been an airfield before the war, or was it put into use in 39 or 40?
No, it hadn't. It was an airfield that was built during the war for the RAF. I think it was built for the RAF on the basis that they were predicting, obviously, they were going to suffer quite a few losses, so it was going to be sort of for training replenishment crews. But that didn't really happen. So pretty much as soon as it had been constructed, it was handed over to the United States Army Air Force, as it was at the time, and various different units and crews and squadrons sort of transitioned through Membry and its short history. But probably the most synonymous is the 436th Troop Carrier Group, which had 4 squadrons, one of which was the 79th Troop Carrier Squadron, of which Night Fright flew as part of. And I guess if you think of Membry and its history, that's probably what people would think of, because it's D-Day, it's Band of Brothers, it's 101st Airborne, it's C-47s really. I mean, once the 436th Troop Carrier moved out, the RAF did move back to Membry for a short period, flying, I think it was 521 Squadron, also operating Dakotas for sort of resupply missions, I think to India at the time. That didn't last long, and it was very quickly closed afterwards. And it's obviously now it's sort of in its current state. It's
so it was only used between the sort of early 40s and late 40s, 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years, early 40s. It's a very sort of short-lived history, really.
I mean, there must be a lot of airfields that were pressed into service, and then happily, immediately afterwards the war, there was no need for military.
Absolutely. Not just airfields, I guess. You would, imagine equipment as well, wouldn't you? Really, a lot of it very quickly becomes surplus. I mean, I've been told many a story of equipment just being big holes dug sort of on the airfield at Membry, and sort of jeeps or motorbikes and equipment just sort of dozed in and
so any metal detectorists out there, if you have an enormous bleep when you're going down the top road, it's not just a Roman coin. It is a flying fortress or something that's been buried there.
Yeah, something like that. I guess that was a bit of a plug for all metal detectors, wasn't it? But we found plenty of stuff. Yeah, we found loads of bits. There was actually a flying fortress B-17 that crashed off the end of the runway at Membry, and there's been little bits and pieces found from that. There's a C-47 that went in at Membry, and we found all sorts of old lighting for the runway and bunkers and all sorts of stuff. I'm sure it's endless if you got the time to tell.
Yeah.
So a flying fortress. I don't know how big the runway is at Membry. It was obviously long enough. I would have thought a flying fortress would need quite a lengthy runway.
Yeah, it would do, but I mean, the runway now is very different.
That's why it crashed.
That's why it crashed.
Maybe it did, yeah.
It could have been 100 yards longer with it.
Yeah, I mean, I landed a C-47 at Membry a couple of weeks ago as part of that Guy Martin D-Day programme, and the runway is vastly shorter now than it would have been, and it was short enough, let me tell you. It wouldn't have been any shorter, that's for sure. But I mean, the construction of the runway during the war was a typical sort of what the Americans called an A-frame. So it was a capital A with a sort of a line across the middle. The idea being that if one of those runways was bombed, there would always be another one available for use. So that's how it would have looked back in the day. The main runway being the north-south runway, which was the longest one during the war. But the M4 motorway running east-west has essentially chopped the top of that off, and it's been shortened subsequently. So when we landed a couple of weeks ago, which was the first time a C-47 had landed at Membry since October 1946, I think, we landed on a sort of a cross grass strip, and I think it was 1,100 metres long, I think it was, and the hedge was coming up pretty quick by the end of that.
It would have been a soft landing though, wouldn't it, to end up in the hedge?
Landing, but we needed every metre when we flew out with about 20 people on board as part of the film as well.
Whoa!
Blimey.
Was Guy Martin on the plane?
Yeah,
so... Care, would he, so...
No, he doesn't. He's not worried. No.
It got to about 1 o'clock last night, and I was halfway through that documentary, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go to bed now. So, for people who haven't seen it, how did they find you? Because obviously it was incredibly good timing that they wanted to make this film, and you were restoring the plane.
Yeah, they came to us. I think that the company that produced the documentary is a company called North One Television, who produce all of Guy Martin's work. And one day, just out of the blue, probably 18 months ago, I got a phone call saying we've spoken to Dax over Normandy, who are advertising the programme of events for the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and we were going to make a TV programme with them, but we decided we wanted to focus on something more specific, because Guy Martin loves getting involved in projects and engineering.
Yeah, getting his hands.
Yeah, would you be interested in making a TV programme with Guy Martin? To which I said, yeah, why the hell not? Yeah, exactly. Who would say no to something like that? So, so the process began, I guess, 18 months ago, and the premise of the programme was Guy Martin gets involved with the restoration of a C-47. He helps finish it off, and at the end of the programme, he jumps out of said aeroplane. So that's essentially what happened. Obviously, there was a point throughout the programme when we realised, sadly, that we weren't going to have Night Fright ready for June. So we had to do a little bit of jiggery-pokery, and they edited the programme a little bit to reflect...
had to have a stunt double.
Yeah, exactly, to reflect the fact that, he hadn't finished the aeroplane, so we had to sort of lose a little bit of the Night Fright footage, if you will, because they can't focus on something which isn't going to be the finale. But we needed an aeroplane for him to jump from, a C-47 for him to jump from, in World War II markings that essentially looked like Night Fright. We weren't pretending it was Night Fright, but it needed to look right. So we chartered in another C-47 and we completed that sequence at Membry with another C-47 called Dragamute. So.
And they were happy for you to fly. You were the pilot.
Yeah, I was one of the two pilots. So I didn't want to miss out on that opportunity. And I think, you know, for continuity purposes, they wanted me to fulfil that role anyway. So it was immense fun. It was a great thing to be involved with. I mean, I can't tell you how much of my time it took up for the last 18 months. You know, even though our involvement probably, you know, doesn't come across as being that much in the documentary, what went on behind the scenes was,
I can imagine,
was tremendous. And Guy Martin is a fantastic character. You know, what you see is what you get. You know, there's no pretending for the TV. That's how he is in normal life. He's down to earth, completely happy to get stuck in with anything, and he was the perfect person for the job.
So some of those scenes where they're lowering the fuselage, so imagine a thing about the size of most people's houses being lowered onto the wings, and getting it exactly right so all the bolts go into the holes, and then it felt like the two things were kind of put together with about 20 bolts. That was all that was holding it together.
That was a nerve-wracking day. I mean, I think one of the questions they asked me on the camera is, you know, how much is it going to cost if they drop this while they're doing it? And the honest answer to the question is, it's not how much it's going to cost, it's how much time it's going to cost, really. I mean, you know, the value is one thing, but it's the time, effort, blood, sweat and tears that, you know, it would take to redo it, really.
So don't drop it.
Basically, don't drop it. Don't drop it. But in terms of the bolts, you're right, it's less than 20 bolts, actually. I think it's about 6 bolts that holds the fuselage to what we call the centre
section. Do they have to be original bolts? I mean, are these ones that you have to
listed buildings where you have to...
That you have to get from some other plane, or could you use modern equivalents?
No, we use modern equivalents. I wouldn't even say modern equivalent. I would say they're the same thing, but they're just, you know, been newly produced. I mean, everything about the aircraft is going to be original. That's the whole premise of what we're doing. The idea is to make it the best C-47 flying in the world and also the most original. So that means it looks 100% like it should have done when you enter the aircraft. But that said, it would be the same as, I guess, you know, doing up an old house or doing up a historic car. Some of the hardware is modern equivalent. The nuts and the bolts and the pipes and stuff are new.
And you want them to be safe and new. And
well, that's it.
And like the end, when he put the engine on, it looked like there was kind of 2 bolts holding the engine on.
4, I think.
4.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe... I mean, I'm not experienced with, you know, in the workings of big pieces of machinery, but even I thought that was...
You thought 4 was not quite enough?
No, 5 would have been okay.
Yeah, 5 would have done it, but I think even Guy was a little bit surprised himself, to be honest. He's obviously a skilled engineer.
Half a ton they were saying that engine cost, and it's held on by a few bolts.
Yeah, it'd probably be closer to a ton, to be honest, by the time it's got all the fluid in it and stuff. But yeah, I mean...
But obviously they knew what they were doing.
And a bit of duct tape as well.
Yeah, a bit of traditional duct tape. Yeah, why not? They use that on airline.
Hold anything together.
Chewing gum. Yeah.
I mean, it's testament to the design, isn't it? These things are still flying today, and you know, I think you'd be surprised anyway, just in engineering in general. If you saw an airliner when it was apart on a major service,
I don't know
hangar somewhere, I think you'd be surprised at what holds things on, to be honest. But it's such a good design, and it's such a clever design. You probably saw a little bit from the programme that it essentially comes apart. So the fuselage lifts off the centre section, which is what the wheels and the engines sit on. The tail's removed. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle.
Like
really.
an airfix kit.
It's like a giant airfix kit. But I mean, the beauty of that, isn't it, is if you suffer battle damage,
you can lose
replace
a bit.
sections. Yeah.
Maybe it's
Why
like
don't they make cars like that?
starfish. So you can lose a leg, it comes off easily, and the rest of the body.
I mean, they're so battle hardy. These things. They'll fly on one engine. You know, the amount of flak and damage these things suffered would have been unbelievable.
But
they still kept going.
There was, I'm like Penny, not at all an expert in this, but I mean, the point you just made is the Second World War must have produced some real genius pieces of functional engineering. I mean, things like the Spitfire, which is obviously the most famous plane, which apparently could be built much more quickly than the German equivalents, were much more manoeuvrable, much cheaper, much lighter, etc. And you know, there must have been. It's a shame that such wonderful feats of human engineering and ingenuity require a global war in order to spark. But there was some. I mean, like you just said about the Dakota, the stunning pieces of functional engineering, which now you get the impression maybe everything is more over-designed and not designed at all
for
any kind of repair or renewal. It's just
Yeah, I think everything you say there
disposable.
is true, and everyone knows, don't they, that war advances technology, and that's the sad fact of life. But I think somebody said that during the war they were producing one of these C-47s
Every
a day,
hour,
an hour,
that's
and
what
there's
it's
so many a
about,
day in the two factories, and
That's
it's
pretty
probably
impressive. Yeah.
it's pretty impressive, and it's going to take us 4 years to restore that. So that puts it into a little bit of context, doesn't it?
Maybe you need some of those Americans over.
Maybe I need to find Rosie the Riveter or something like that. Yeah.
So when she's completed finally in Coventry, there'll be a flight down to Membry.
Yeah, if I'm honest, I haven't got that far in my mind yet. Obviously, the finale probably was going to be this filming with Guy Martin, so there would have been a big unveil at that point. But yes, now we're sort of our own boss in terms of what we do for the roller. I think that will probably be what we do. We'll come down to Membry. There'll be a big open day where everyone who's interested can come up, and I'm sure there'll be some local press interest, and we'll probably do a flight and a few fly pasts and some bits and pieces.
Will you get Guy Martin back to jump out of the plane for real this time?
Watch this space is what I would say to that. Yeah.
But will it be kept at Membry? Will it?
That's the long-term plan. Yeah, I mean, clearly at the moment the runway probably isn't that suitable to have it based there, and certainly it's not going to live outside. These things don't live outside, so it requires a fairly large shed to put it in. All of which
You've got one of those, haven't you?
We've got some of those. I'm not sure my father would be that impressed if I took up his warehouse with an aeroplane. But
Well, just move it in there, and they'll, it's there.
There are some plans for Memory Effort. We have some plans in the pipeline. One of which is looking at the runway situation. The second of which is putting up a building for it to live in, and the third of which is putting some kind of a local museum together, which will be assisted by people like Roger Day, which is not a business venture. It's for local people and the enthusiasts to come and have a look round and see what happened at Membry. So,
a bit like the one at Welford.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I guess to start with.
Green and Common as well.
And at Green and Common and Little. Yeah. I mean, I guess to start with, it'll have to be something that's by appointment. If you get a group of people and they want to come and have a look, we'll open it up. But if it gains traction, then
Well, it sounds
why
like
not?
Heritage Lottery grant application kind of material.
It does a little
Yeah.
bit. I think we've done the aircraft off our own back, which we're in a fantastically fortunate position to be able to do. But when people say to me, why are you doing it? My answer is always because if you don't do these things when you've got the opportunity, they get lost. And but certainly I think if we could get a little bit of help with the museum and that side of things, I think it would be nice. I mean, we don't necessarily need it to do it, but I think it would be nice to have some kind of sort of funding and sort of public support in the project. Really.
This is phase one of the project, and you've got quite a bit more to consider once. And
Yes.
I get the idea. It would be great to keep it in Membry. It would be the right place to keep it, wouldn't it?
I think it would be the right place. I mean, it would be the only C-47 in the world to operate from its base where it operated from during the Second World War. So that's pretty cool. The whole reason we're doing it is Membry and the history. So
Where else would
got to
you
go back.
Where else would you put it?
That's it. We've just got to look at the runway and the fact that it's an unlicensed airfield and what we can do operationally from there. But
Just get them to move the M4.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, have a quick chat to the highways agency.
I'm sure they'd understand. In the aftermath of D-Day.
We don't use the Costa and services.
There's about 4 Costas, isn't there? So they could lose one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What better time to ask than the 75th anniversary of D-Day?
Absolutely.
But what would happen if you got a phone call tomorrow, or today maybe, from somebody who said, I have just found another plane which flew from Membry, and it's in a scrapyard in Minnesota, say. Do you want it? Now that you've done it all, or most of it, and know the ropes, what would your answer be?
The answer would probably be no, to be honest.
One is enough.
Yeah, one's
Okay,
enough.
I'll just call the bloke back. He's not interested. Okay, yeah, sorry.
If he's got any parts on there that might be useful, then do give us a shout.
It's too late. He's hung up now.
It's been a massive project. It's been way more involved than we ever thought.
If you'd known what it was, would you have started? If you'd known what it was.
Depends if you catch me on a good day or not. Really, to be honest, I'd say yes, but there's definitely a part of me that would say, that's too big a thing to take on. I mean, it's been more involved than I thought. It's cost more than I thought. It's taken longer than I thought, and it's been epic, really, to be honest. But the journey has been amazing. The people we've met, the things we've been to, has been absolutely incredible. And to make a TV programme with Guy Martin is a once in a lifetime opportunity as well. So I wouldn't change any of that, but I wouldn't say it hasn't been a burden because it has really. Yeah.
And as much as I've very strong feelings about war and everything, but there's the documentary, the people who were interviewed, the guys who jumped out of the plane, and it was just heartrending. What they went through, and what and the guys were shouting at Guy for the parachute training, and they were, what was it called, combat de-stressing or something.
Yeah.
This guy screaming in your face.
Doesn't sound like de-stressing to me.
No, but they have to get used to stress, and this is what the people have to cope with in war situations, and I don't think most of us really understand.
I don't think most of us do appreciate it. I mean, we all know a little bit about the Second World War, and most of us know a little bit about D-Day. But to turn around to someone and say, "Look, you've got to make a 2-hour TV program about D-Day," that's a huge task. It's such a vast subject. I mean, and you're never going to please everyone, by the bits you include or the bits you exclude. But personally, I think it came across pretty well, and I think they did a fantastic job. The premise of the aircraft was to get Guy Martin involved in some engineering, restoring a C-47, jumping out and recreating what happened 75 years ago, but with a strong focus on veterans, and veterans both from the RAF and from the United States Army Air Force, and sort of telling their perspective. It's all about the veterans, really, and at the end of the day, that's why we're doing this. It's about history, and it's about the people that lost their lives for our freedom, really.
And there are not many of them left who are alive to tell the story, so...
No, and I think that's why there was such a big focus on the 75th anniversary of D-Day this year, because, if we're being honest, it's probably the last major anniversary that a lot of these veterans will see. Okay, there's going to be the 76th, the 77th, 78th, but what's it without the veterans? It's still a significant date, and we'll all do the same sort of commemorations, but to have these guys there is pretty special, isn't it, really?
Just one more question from me. I've got to ask about flying it. So you've obviously flown a lot of aircraft at the time.
Yep.
Have you flown commercial?
Yeah, so I that's what I do commercially. I fly biz jets.
You fly business jets. Yeah. I've got to say, there's going to be a huge difference. And do you get more pleasure out of flying something like a Dakota than a business jet? And there's obviously a lot more skill involved. You haven't got the instruments, the computers, etc. Or do you think no, it's not? It's great because it's a historical piece of machinery. It's great to be part of that, but I'd rather stick to flying a commercial type jet.
Yeah, the simple answer to the first part of the question is I definitely get more pleasure out of flying a C-47 or anything else vintage. That's for sure. I guess I see business jets or airliners as the day job, and the rest of it as sort of hobby flying, really. But I'd say different skills, not necessarily more skill in flying a C-47, but different. I mean, flying an airliner or any kind of a modern jet is very much sort of monitoring computers, button pressing, and lots of technology, whereas a C-47 is old school. You wrestle it around the sky. It's got no autopilot.
No power steering.
No power steering. Well, that's it.
I like that too.
That's great.
It's much more visceral. You can kind of feel everything, I guess, and
it's just much more manual, really. There is no autopilot. It's heavy. You turn to go left, you wait, and then it responds. That sort of thing. It's very much more manual and sort of mechanical, really. Where in your average airliner today, taking off from Heathrow or Gatwick or wherever at 400 feet, they're pressing a button and the autopilot comes in. You probably don't have to take manual control of the airplane until you're 400 feet at the other end. Okay, there's lots of paperwork and lots of button pressing and monitoring and checks and other things to do, but it's not quite the same, really.
No,
you don't feel so hands-on.
No, you don't. And sort of going off topic a little bit, but that's one of the dangers sort of to modern aviation and modern piloting, really, is that pilots lose that kind of hands-on sort of functionality and skill.
So if everything breaks down up in the air, they maybe not have the experience to take over.
Yeah, they do. There's probably an element to that, but I mean, a lot of the trends you're seeing these days with some of these accidents with the modern airliners is they're overcomplicated systems and people not having the ability to understand them. That's what's happening. It's not, it's not pilot error.
You see it in
such.
cars, all the things that come up on the dashboard.
Too many distractions.
I had a BMW years ago, just when the computer in cars were introduced, and it kept on, these lights started coming on, and it was a sort of mid-range thing. And I took it to this Greek garage I knew, and he said, "Oh God, these bloody big computers in it." He said, "I'll just leave it with me for 5 minutes." And I went and sat and had a cup of coffee, and he came out and he had this thing in his hand that had these sort of leads hanging out. And he said, "I fixed it for you." And I said, "What have you done?" So I've ripped the bloody computer out. He said, "Next, you want a car fixed?" He said, "You go to a mechanic, yeah? You want to go to computer? You go to a computer shop. They put the two together, it's rubbish." And it was absolutely fine after that. There was this gap in the dashboard. All these lights stopped coming on. Brilliant. But there were these lights, and he said, "The thing is, there's lights that come on that tell you that another light's broken." It's crazy.
Well, that's that's how it is. That's how an airliner operates. But the example of a car is a good one, isn't it? If you buy your average modern day car and you've got a problem with it, you open the bonnet, what you're greeted with a whole load of stuff covered in plastic, and you can't actually work out what's where. And the first thing they need to do is plug a laptop into it to work out what's wrong with it. But that's what happens on a modern airliner. If there's a catastrophic failure, you've got sort of, I don't know, whatever, a couple of iPad-sized screens in the middle, and there's warning after warning. So you solve that one, and then you have to solve that one. You solve that one, and you solve that one. All the time you're trying to talk to air traffic. Until you've solved these programs, the computer's flying the airplane. You can't make it do what you want it to do. And
but you've always got Charlton Heston on the ground on the phone, though, haven't you?
Absolutely.
So
just press this. You're absolutely fine. Yeah.
I've seen airplane. I know what goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a different world, but that's not to belittle some of the technology that we've got on aeroplanes and everything else these days, because some of it's is incredible and it enhances safety no end. But there's pitfalls to everything as well, isn't
It's
there?
the interface between human and computer.
That's exactly it. Hardware and software and how they interface.
So we've only got 5 minutes left. So just for people to kind of follow your progress over the next months, years, you have your own website.
Yep.
Night Fright.
We do night-fright.com. Yeah. Probably where we put out most of our content is probably online, so on our Facebook page. So if you just type Night Fright C47 Restoration Project into Facebook or YouTube or any of the other platforms, we should come up. We try to do some pretty, what we think is pretty cool sort of video updates, maybe once or twice a month, where we sort of, some various members of the team are interviewed, and we looked at sections of the project and what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we look a little bit into the history as well. So we publish those on YouTube and Facebook a couple of times a month, but and we try to do a few sort of live sessions.
And you've got a shop. You sell branded stuff.
We sell a little bit of branded stuff, just for aviation enthusiasts and people that are interested, not to make a huge amount of money, but just for a bit of brand awareness, really. And that's all on the website on night-fright.com. So keep an eye out on progress, and by the end of the year, you'll see Night Fright in the skies.
Brilliant.
It's a good place to go and buy bolts, isn't it? Because you don't use many of them to keep the engines on.
No, we should have a surplus.
You buy a set of 6, you only need 4, so you've got the other 2 yourself.
Yeah, we could do with a few spares as well.
So on Penny Post, also, if you put in Night Fright, there's the article that we did with you last month, and we've also got a link to the Guy Martin. It's only 4 days left to view that.
But yeah, that's gone quickly, hasn't it? To be honest. So
will you have access to it after Channel 4?
That's something I'm working on with Channel 4 and North One Television. Obviously, there's a few rules and regs of what I can and can't do, but certainly we'll be putting some stuff up online.
They owe you for all that.
Well, they are very grateful. So you're right. For them, it was
maybe a way they can show it by letting you continue to have access
even if
to
they,
film.
Well, hopefully they'll come back and do something with us. There are discussions in the pipeline as to what we can do with Guy Martin.
Well, you've got to get him to come back and jump out of the real plane, like I say, and there'll be a crowd of people watching now.
Yeah, well, the good thing is he's kind of like...
You fundraise for the project by charging, £10,000 for anybody who wants to go up and jump out of the plane.
Well, there might be some of that once we've got it flying, but Guy Martin is the sort of bloke, and he's already said to me personally that he'll come out and jump out of it whether there's a TV camera there or not. So that's the nice thing. Do you know what? He might just do that, but you never know.
He's that hard.
He is that hard.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So just one more from me. So you mentioned we'll see it in the skies before the end of the year. Is that an optimistic we'll see the plane in the skies at the end of the year, or are you really saying we're gonna get out?
No, I don't think it's optimistic. I mean, you could look at it and say, okay, they said they'd have it flying by June and they haven't, so maybe it is optimistic if people want to look at it like that. But I know what we've got left to do in the project.
Is it a pilot's promise or a politician's promise?
Let's hope it's not a politician's promise. But by the end of the year, we'll have it test flying. I'm not saying that every last detail is going to be done, but we'll have it airborne and you'll be able to see it.
Excellent. We should look forward to that. We're going to have to get you back. We'd certainly like to come along and see it in Memory for the first time. Yeah,
definitely. We'll have to get you up when we land at Memory for the first time, won't we?
A couple of interviews along with Channel 4.
While parachuting out of the plane, Chris.
I think you just volunteered there.
Lovely. Well, we'll finish with your last track. You've chosen Bryan Adams' Summer of '69. Is there a reason this is one of your favourite?
Not really. I mean, the first track was just a nod to the aircraft, really. It was obviously built and sort of in the USA, so I thought that would be pretty cool. And Summer of '69 by Bryan Adams is just a personal favourite of mine, really.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
No, thanks for your time.
And best of luck with the rest of the project.
Thank you very much.